Good morning, Dan McGann. How
Hello.
are you?
Very good, thank you. Nice
Good.
to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. It's a great show, isn't it?
Oh, so far so good.
Well, we have a little bit of administrata to do here.
All
We're
right.
going to get our Periscope
Sounds good.
broadcast stream set up. So let's take just a second to do that. And then we'll get started with tips and tricks for getting started with Node.js.
Cool.
So that's cool. All right. So it is at Dan McGann, right?
Yep.
Cool. All right. There we go. So, you know, watching me type is awful. At DM.
CGHAN. Perfect.
Getting started with, huh?
Are we live now?
We are live. So what else are we going to talk about? It's
We're letting folks know.
all right. Getting started with let's see, the Node, great, JS, and
Oops,
that
no,
new
they
thing.
replaced it with models. Spell check. evil spell check.
Oh my gosh, that's horrible. This is really bad video with Node.js and
And let's say the MLE, and I'll explain that in a little bit.
MLE go live. All right, so we've been live on YouTube for a while. Good morning.
Awesome. Hello.
It is Wednesday morning here at Oracle Open World. We're at the Oracle Developers Lounge here. It's a great show.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah,
3 talks down, 2 to go.
Wow.
Lot of things going on.
that's great.
Yeah.
This is really good. So it's really cool of you to agree to do this little interview because, you know, you talk about just 3 sessions, but then they want you at that theater, at that demo, at,
Yeah.
you know. So you've been running all over the
A lot of
place.
work, sure. And booth duty.
Yes, it's a
Always
good show
booth
for
duty.
you. So let's get started because we've got maybe 20 minutes. And we're going to break this up into sections so that you can jump forward and back.
Sure.
But let's start with your tips and tricks.
All right, so actually, before we get to the tips and tricks, I just want to let folks know about something new. I can finally start talking about this. This is something that the Oracle Labs group has been working on for a little while. I just wasn't allowed to talk about it, but now they have a release out, so it's kind of official and it's now a thing. And it's basically JavaScript in the database. You know, there's been this trend for a while of using JavaScript in more and more places. That's really what Node.js is all about. Using JavaScript in the middle tier, and so now we're taking it even closer where the data's at, actually in the database. So here's a very high-level overview where we're doing a typical NPM install here, and we're installing a package known as Validator. And Validator is this really great library that has all kinds of validation routines, including one for is email, but there's tons and tons of others, and they're actually quite complex. You think, oh, I could just write a regex and be done with it, but it's really not that simple. So we get this package, and then we can deploy it now to the database using this little utility here, dbjs, deploy.
Right.
And just specify your package here. It's validator.js, and then your connect info for the database, and off it goes and into the database. And so one of the ways that you can use this is as a user-defined function in the SQL engine. So here we say select email from emails where validator.isEmail equals 1.
Nice.
Because the SQL engine doesn't have Boolean, so we use 0 and 1.
Okay.
So this is just really cool technology, and let me flip really quick to a web page. Now the URL that you're going to see here is not the actual URL. What I did is I just created a bit.ly link so that folks could actually remember it. So it's bit.ly/oracle-mle. And the MLE, as you see here, is for the database multilingual engine. Now what it is, if I could get this menu to stop popping up, it's basically technology that enables developers to work with multiple languages in the database. So they started with JavaScript, but the idea is to add in other scripting languages over time.
Okay.
So that you can choose your favorite language.
No way.
And at this point, what they have now is a download And it's basically a VirtualBox VM. It is rather large. It's a 12 gig download.
Okay.
It has Oracle database installed. It's 12.1, so it does have JSON capabilities.
Okay.
As well as this new MLE. And so folks can come over here to documentation, kind of learn a little bit about how it works and start kicking the tires. And we're just really excited about getting this out there and interested to see how folks use it and adopt it and see what they come up with and put it to use.
I do love that. So I noticed that you clicked on the OTN license. No, maybe you did not. You went over to the documentation.
Yeah, documentation,
what license is this under? Do you happen to know?
I do not, no.
Well, we'll look into that, and we'll double back on that. So it's good. It'll be good to know.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, let's switch back over to tips and tricks. So this is a basic. This is actually not just tips and tricks for the Node.js in general, but rather more specifically the Node.js driver that we have for Oracle database.
Okay, good.
Let me just get through some of this. So at a very high level overview, I doubt we'll have time to get through it all, but we'll just see where we end up.
Cool, man.
But high level, we start with some basics when you start using the driver in general. Then we go into what you need to know when you're working with more than one user. And finally, what you should know when you're executing SQL and PL SQL in general.
All right.
So let's start with getting started with the driver. You need to be aware of your session time zone, and you need to encrypt connections. So we'll start with session time zone. And here's a scenario. Imagine you create a table. It's a very simple table, T, and it has a single column, a date column, C. Mm-hmm. And you write some JavaScript code and use the driver to insert a row into this new table you've created, right?
Right.
So you can see here on line 5, I'm creating a new date in JavaScript, and it's a UTC date. And the actual value, it's January 1st, midnight 2017, right?
Right, okay.
So we take this value, and we use the driver to insert it into our new table, and we just bind that value in. Pop quiz, what date value made it into the table?
The default one.
Well, you would think, right?
No?
Well, as always, it depends, right?
That was a trick question.
Yeah, we don't have enough
no
info
fair.
at this point to answer this question accurately.
Okay.
And in fact, if I go into SQL Dev and I just run select C from T, I actually get December 31st at 8 p.m., so about 4 hours off of what I would have expected. So let's look at a few things we need to consider here. And the first thing is that actual column. If it's either a date or a timestamp, these values do not have a time zone component. So it's kind of implicit. You actually have to know when you're designing your schema what time zone those dates should be.
Okay.
So if it's Eastern, maybe we don't have a problem. Maybe it's accurate. But if it's UTC, supposed to be UTC, then yeah, we're 4 hours off and there's an issue.
Right.
So let's assume it was supposed to be UTC, and we do in fact have a problem. Well, the next thing you need to know is how Oracle database driver binds in these data types. Mm-hmm. And the way it does it, it converts it to a timestamp with local time zone, which is a nice data type within Oracle. All right, so the next thing is what happens if we take that data type and insert it into a date column? Well, here's the problem. We get an implicit data conversion.
Oh, no, okay.
So what ends up happening, the value, when we do this, of that data type is converted to the session time zone.
Not good.
And we'll come back to that. And then it's inserted into the date column, and we lose the time zone stuff, and we lose milliseconds, right?
Okay.
So the big question is, where did that session time zone come from? And that's what most folks are going to run into. And the answer is with node-oracledb, it's going to pick up the time zone from the operating system when you start up your Node app.
Okay, got it.
So Node's running in the middle tier on some server, and the sysadmin, whoever created that server, when they created it, they had to pick a time zone. And if they picked a local time zone, you may have a problem because it may not match what you're expecting. So this is actually really easy to work around, not a big deal.
Okay.
We have an environment variable, or a SDTZ, and you can set that prior to running your Node app and get whatever time zone you want. So it's just something folks need to be aware of. If you need more granular control over that, that's fine too. We can go at the connection level and just alter the session time zone. You can use a logon trigger for certain schemas. There's all kinds of ways to work with it. The key is really just to be aware of how this works and how to deal with it when it's not working the way you want it to.
Got it. Okay, good.
Cool. Let's move on to encrypting connections between Node and the database. So the way this generally starts, when you have a traditional 3-tier architecture, folks always think, we need a secure connection between the browser and our mid-tier, right?
Right.
So they look into SSL, they get their they get their certs, and
Yep.
they're good to go, off to the races, right?
Okay.
A little bit later, folks think about the actual data, especially data at rest, and they're thinking, oh man, we need to secure this. If folks get to our disks, or if we're running backups, we need those to be encrypted as well.
Right.
So of course, Oracle has transparent data encryption. We make this really easy. So they enable that, and they're good to go. Then folks look at this connection between what's behind the firewall from Node to the database, and they think this is overkill, right? It's obviously going to be a real pain to deal with. We're not even going to bother. No one's going to ever get there anyway, right? Do you recognize this slide? Does this ring a bell? So this is one of the many slides that came out when Edward Snowden exposed the PRISM project.
Right.
And they were actually looking at Google, and I'll just focus your attention right here on the slide. It says SSL added and removed here, smiley face, right? So this was obviously their target. They were taking advantage of the fact that most folks don't encrypt at that layer. And, you know, if the good guys are doing this, chances are the bad guys are doing it too, right?
Exactly.
So we do want to encrypt here. And what I have here is an example of a query that you can run to detect whether or not your node server is enabled with encryption. And it's basically just pulling data from session and session connect info.
Okay.
And then we just log out the rows. And when we do not have encryption enabled, you get these 3 rows back. And you'll see that we do have encryption service and checksumming service available. We're just not utilizing them right now. So how can we do that? Well, it's important to understand that we can do this at the database level, or we can do it at the client level. And at the database level, the advantage is that we can make sure that all connections coming into the database are encrypted. That's nice, but maybe not practical for everyone, especially if they're just starting down this encryption journey.
Exactly.
So we can do it at the client as well, and that's what I'm doing here. So all we need to do is create a SQLnet.ora file on the Node server, and we just add these 4 lines. Not terribly complex, right? So we save that to a location like opt-oracle config, and then we set another environment variable, the TNS admin. We just point it to this directory.
Okay.
Then we rerun that same query, and you're going to notice 2 new lines. And you'll see that we have the encryption service adapter running and the checksumming service adapter running. So now encryption's enabled. But if you don't trust the additional 2 lines, you want to actually see this thing in action, well, there's different ways you could do it. You could use some advanced tools, but they're often hard to, like Wireshark, they're kind of hard to install on your database server.
Right.
So we actually have an easier way you can do that.
Thank
so
God.
Just revisit that SQLnet.ora, add these 4 lines, and what you're basically doing here is enabling a diagnostic trace.
Okay.
And saying where the output files should go and that kind of stuff.
Good.
And then what you do is you run 2 tests, one with these settings here commented out with hashes, and the other with them not commented out, enabled, right?
Okay, got it.
What you'll end up with are 2 separate trace files. The first with encryption disabled, and you can actually see the select and column names. In addition to the query going to the database, you're actually going to see the data coming back from the database, and it's all going to be in plain text.
Wow.
On the encryption side, you're not going to understand a single thing.
A lot of dots.
Yeah. So it was super easy to enable. There's really no reason not to do it these days, so get the encryption on, and you're protected end to end.
Sweet.
So that's the basics for getting started with the driver, kind of like just after install.
Right.
But what about
But those are both really important because they'll hang you up later down.
Absolutely.
You know, when you start doing your
especially
builds.
the dates.
It's just like, what? Yeah, especially
then you
the
have
dates.
dirty data, and cleaning that up is going to be a pain.
Dirty data.
Yep.
That's right.
All right, so let's look at what you need to know when you're working with more than one user.
Okay.
So the basics, got to use a connection pool. We do have a connection pool cache to help make that easier. And there's a trick with Node to be able to use more than one or more than 4 connections at a time, which we'll have to look at as well. So we'll start with a connection pool. There's different classes in Oracle or in the database driver, and we have the base class, and the base class is usually used to either create a pool or a connection. And when you create a connection from the base class, we call this a one-off or dedicated connection. That's fine if you're doing occasional scripts that may be run periodically.
Right.
But if you're creating something like an API where you have multiple users sending requests in, you cannot do that. It will not scale. You have to create a connection pool first and then get these connections from the pool.
Okay, so pool first.
Yeah,
Got
the advantage is the pool has the connections created, and then you just simply use and reuse them and release them.
Got it.
Now, how do we create a pool? It's actually quite simple. Use that base class's create pool method. So you're passing in the standard connect info you normally would, but then you have additional parameters for the pool itself. And in this case, the pool min and max are the same, the increment set to 0, so we have a fixed pool of 20 connections here. And actually, the real-world performance team recommends this kind of fixed pool thing so it doesn't spend time or resources scaling up or down.
All right.
So I like that. And then we can use that pool to get our connections. It's super easy. So I have here a test that I ran to compare the two, right? I gotta convince people to use the pool.
Right.
And so if you're not going to use the pool, and we're doing an iteration here, 10,000 iterations, we're getting a connection from the base class using the config. So this is that one-off dedicated connection.
Uh-huh.
We get a connection, we execute a query, we close the connection, we do it about 10,000 times.
Nice.
On my laptop with a local VM, that took about 346 seconds. All right.
Okay.
So then I have another test here with a pool. And the big difference is I'm creating this pool before we get into the loop.
Uh-huh.
And the only difference in the loop is that I'm getting the connection from the pool.
Nice.
That's really the only change.
Okay.
Took 6 seconds. If you put them side by side, you can see how much you're going to save just by using a pool. And it's not terribly hard to do, right?
Side by side.
Yeah. I actually had a 3D one,
You had
too.
to have the bar chart in there. Thanks, man. Because, just saying it wasn't enough.
It
you
wasn't.
had to,
Yeah.
okay.
All right. Couple other notes on the pool. For get connection, we do have a queue. So you don't have to keep polling if all the connections are in use. So it makes it nice and easy to use. The key with a pool, just keep the connections out only as long as you need them.
Okay.
It's usually for as long as a transaction takes, and then release them back to the pool.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Now, one thing that you'll run into, we were running into this when we first created the pool technology, was oftentimes with Node, you have multiple files or modules within a Node application.
Right.
So you're going to create this pool in one module, but you need to consume the pool in many other modules, right?
I understand.
So if you create it in main, the question becomes, how do you then share it to these other modules? And what it really was forcing folks to do is create a separate module where they create their pool and then add methods like get pool so they could retrieve it from the other places. And it was just a lot of boilerplate code we didn't want folks to have to do. So we built in a little pool cache, and I'll show you here how that works. So the idea is in main.js, we're creating a pool with the config, and note that I'm not even referencing the pool anymore. I know that it's been added to the cache. The first pool you create becomes the default in that cache.
Right on.
And then what we can do from another file like employees.js is simply use the base class again. This time I'm calling get connection, but note that I'm not passing in a config. And when you don't pass anything in, it knows to look in that default pool and grab the connection from there. Most folks are only going to have one pool, so this works fine for them.
Okay, good.
In the case that you have multiple pools or you don't like that implicit default, you can explicitly use an alias. So in this case, our configuration for the pool has a pool alias called human resources pool. And then from employees.js, you just pass in a string, human resources pool, and it knows to grab the connection from that pool.
Gotcha.
Super easy to use. Really no reason you shouldn't be using the pool and the pool cache. The only other thing you need to be aware of is how Node.js works with threads and thread pool. It's often described as a single-threaded environment, but that's just kind of part of the story, right?
Oh, okay.
So in reality, the way it works is you have this main thread for JavaScript. All the JavaScript code you're going to write is going to run here, but part of that code will eventually make an async API call out, maybe an HTTP request, database driver request, things of that sort.
Okay.
Now it's going to fall into one of two pools. It's either going to be completely evented, things like timers and TCP, which includes HTTP,
right.
or it's going to come into this thread pool bucket. That's file I/O, DNS, and user code, which includes encryption, compression, and anything you're going to do with the database driver.
Gotcha.
Now really, the secret sauce for Node.js is right here in the evented category. This is what Node does better than just about anything else out there. It's highly efficient, can scale real well. Everything else has got to leverage a thread pool. So really what happens with the thread pool and what folks need to be aware of is that Node starts off with 4 threads in that thread pool by default.
Okay.
So if you create a connection pool with 20 connections, but you leave that default, only 4 connections can be working at any given point in time.
And then later you'll be saying, why can't I get that? Dan told me to set up this
won't scale.
pool and it won't connect.
Not only that, Node.js deadlocks, it's a new kind of deadlock. We had folks that were complaining. These are folks that had complex transactions.
Yeah.
So they were doing updates and row level locking was occurring. And they tried to do the commit at the end, which was that last round trip to release the locks. and they couldn't get a connection. They couldn't get a thread from the thread pool because other connections were waiting on the locks to release.
No.
Yeah, it was a really interesting scenario, but really easy to fix. There's an environment variable for Node.js called UV thread pool size.
Okay.
And the key is you just need to set this prior to running your Node app, and you're fine. So we recommend you set it a little higher than your pool max. If you're using multiple pools, you need to do the math. And the max is 128. Just keep that in mind. So what we have here is an example of setting this prior to running your Node app.
Okay, yeah, good idea.
So, yeah, easiest way to do it. If you do it in your app, you can do this too, but it has to be done. No, it just has to be done at the right time.
Oh.
So as long as you do it before this call here, this is an async call.
Okay.
Once the first async call happens, that's when they create the pool, and that's when they use the default of 4. So if you set the default prior, you're good.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's going to use the default. How are we doing on time?
You know, we're doing all right on time. Mike Hitchwood just joined us. He's over there catching up on a couple things. So, all right, so to wrap up, 3 really cool tips.
Yep.
On using the Node.js driver.
Right.
And then our new announcement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool.
Go check it out, download it. It's
have you tried it out yet?
I have not. I just got here. It's been a bit of a whirlwind,
right.
and the team that released it on Monday.
Yeah.
So I'll
spend
the
hotel,
time.
It's hard
exactly.
to get it out there.
A 12 gig download is gonna take a little bit.
Yeah, it's gonna be a little work.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's excellent. Well, I'm so glad that you dropped by.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll talk to you soon,
Fun.
and we'll see you on your blog, of course.
Sounds good.
And keep up all the...
JSAO.io.
Yes, JSAO.io, meaning that you've moved out to GitHub, right?
Yeah. Well, it's JavaScript and Oracle.io, but it's not in GitHub, although I love that idea.
Yeah. All right. Well, good. I'm really glad to have you on board today, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks again.
Thanks.
Take care. It made a lot more sense the way you did it.